Hello everyone, today I'm going to introduce a library of models and solution approaches for multi-stage stochastic programs under Type 2 endogenous uncertainty. It is typical of chemical engineering practice that there are uncertainties connected with the design process like the production and planning scheduling and product and process design. The multi-stage stochastic program method will capture the nature of sequential decision-making under uncertainty, as it recognizes the non-anticipativity of planning decisions for each stage, while allowing recourse for decisions in the subsequent stages. And it is a scenario-based modeling approach where the scenarios represent unique realizations of uncertainty, and the uncertainty is realized along the planning horizon. The indistinguishable scenarios with unresolved uncertainties are linked by non-anticipativity constraints. For the development of scenarios, the total number of scenarios are combinations of possible outcomes of all certain parameters. And the number of scenarios grows with increasing number of uncertain parameters and number of realizations for each uncertain parameters. There are two different types of uncertainty: the exogenous, where the true parameter values are revealed independently of decisions, and the endogenous, where the uncertainty realizations are influenced by the decisions. And the endogenous uncertainty can further classify as type 1 and type 2 endogenous uncertainty, where the type 1 decisions impact the distribution of uncertainty, and in type 2, the decision impact the observation of uncertainty. Unlike the pure exogenous uncertainty, where the time period of differentiation between scenarios is known prior and the scenario tree is fixed, for the pure endogenous uncertainty, the time of differentiation between scenarios is decision dependent. And if we decide to do nothing, all scenarios should be identical until the end of time periods. And if we have decision invest in phi at stage 0, the two scenario groups will be distinguishable based on the outcome of the phi at next stage. And if we further invest in psi, and then these two scenarios will be distinguishable based on the outcome of the psi. And if we have different decisions, the linkage between scenarios will also be different. This table contains 11 MSP models with type 2 endogenous uncertainty. And since 1998, where the Just Branton defined the size problem, which has a decision-dependent uncertainty, which is a production cost, there are different aspects considered when developing the MSP models under this type 2 endogenous uncertainty. And here we can see from the source of uncertainty, we have the production cost, field parameter, yields, geology, uncertainty, outcomes, resource requirements, return level, demands, gas flow rate change ratio, level of consumer participation, outcome of technology development, yield of process, and learning curve rate. And here we also see the ways of the scenario generation. Most of the problem generate the scenarios using Cartesian product, which generate a full set of scenarios. While in the open pit mining and vehicle routing problem, the arbitrary scenario set is generated by the sampling method. We have implemented these 11 models in the PyOmo and Python, and they have been released at this following link in the GitHub. Here is a general formulation for MSSP under endogenous uncertainty. In MSP, the objective here is to minimize the expected cost with the endogenous uncertainty theta, and we have the scenario-specific inequality and equalities, and initial next, endogenous next, and uncertainty realization rule constraint. And for the initial next, where at the first time period, the values of decision variables are enforced identical because all scenarios are indistinguishable. And for the conditional non-anticipativity constraint, we first have the Boolean variable, which indicates either these two scenarios are indistinguishable, and we will also have the control variables, which control the information discovery and used in next or to generate the Boolean variables for forcing the indistinguishable scenarios. And we also have a recourse variable, which takes corrective action after random event has taken place. From the current literature, we find that 7 models of the MSP library need additional Boolean variables, and 4 models using the existing variable as Boolean variable. In terms of control variables, which are decisions revealing the observations of uncertainty, we have different types of control variables from current literatures. Three models have continuous and/or binary control variables. For example, the offshore oil field infrastructure planning problem, the drilling decisions lead to the uncertainty observation. The uncertainty only revealed if the drill at least n number of wells in the field. And the rest of 8 models contain only binary control variables, which the binary decisions mainly control the information discovery, such as the decisions for production, the installation decisions, processes operation decision, aggregate extraction decision, start decisions for clinical trials, customer visiting decision, artificial lift installation decision, and investment decisions. This table summarizes the next formulation and properties to reduce the scenario pairs. In terms of the next formulation, most of the papers are using the differentiator sets concept and using the logic constraint to generate the Boolean variables and the disjunctive structure to enforcing the non-exhibitivity of planning decisions. And in the properties to reduce the scenario pairs or total number of scenarios, we can summarize that fully utilize the symmetry of scenarios next to find the minimum number of next. And there are some problem-specific properties and next formulations, which can further reduce the net number of next. To reduce the scenario pairs, for example, in open pit mining, this problem is specific to identify the lazy constraint, and one of the variables associated next are removed. And also for the offshore oil infrastructure planning problem, where we can use the correlation for uncertain parameters, which has the same level of outcomes, and we can further reduce the total number of scenarios. And in paper of vehicle routing and for the late paper in clinical trial planning problem, we can identify the maximum time for indistinguishable scenarios and define the limited time to generate the next and further reduce the number of next. Next, we will apply 2 proposed approaches for 3 of the MSP models, which are process network synthesis, clinical trial, and artificial lift planning problems. The artificial lift infrastructure planning problem determines the optimal artificial lift methods and their installation time periods. The objective is to maximize the net present value, which has several economic components, and it has an installation plan sequencing constraint, the gas production constraint, the operation and design constraint, and artificial valid inequality constraint, and also the non-anticipativity constraints. For clinical trial planning problem with uncertain outcome, a set of candidate drugs have to pass through 3 clinical trial phases before its revenue realized. And the outcomes of each drug is uncertain parameters, and each drug naturally has 4 discrete outcomes, which can fail phase 1 or fail phase 2 or fail phase 3, or successfully pass the phase 3. And the objective is also to maximize the expected net present value, which has a component of the current revenue and future revenue. And it has a sequencing constraint, resource constraint, and non-anticipativity constraints. The process network synthesis with uncertain yields is also to maximize the expected net present value, which to determine the optimal installation, operation, and purchase sales inventory decisions. In the objective function, it has a fixed and variable expansion operation cost, raw material cost, purchase sales, and inventory cost. And it has a material inventory balance constraint, flow and capacity constraint, sequence constraint, and non-anticipativity constraints. The first approach is generalized knapsack problem-based decomposition algorithm, which decomposes original MSSP into a series of knapsack subproblems, and items are decision variables. Item values are generated to approximate the value of eligible items, and the inequality and quality constraint are directly transformed to weight constraint in knapsack subproblems, which we call the KSP, by removing both time and scenario indices. For the general scheme of GKDA, we will first construct only one knapsack subproblem with getting rid of scenario and time indices. After solving the initial knapsack subproblem, when we observe realized uncertainty, we will generate subproblems, child subproblem based on the values of realized uncertain parameters. Then we solve each child new subproblems. and construct new child subproblems based on the realized uncertainty and repeat this process until the end of planning horizon. In terms of comparison of GKDA and MSP, as we introduced before, the MSP is scenario-based approach where we have to enumerate all scenarios at the beginning and repeat in each time period, and the number of constraints and variables grows exponentially. And GKDA is a process-based approach where the single subproblem at the beginning is generated, and we only encounter realized outcomes and generate relative subproblems. And GKDA does not have the next and address both space and computational complexity. We implemented MSP and GKDA in PyML and Python and solved using the simplex. And we first applied to the artificial lift infrastructure planning problem, as here we can see the MSP can not be solved for the longer planning horizon cases with over 24-month planning horizon within 20 hours, while the GKDA will be able to obtain the optimal solutions and reduce the solution times up to 5 orders of magnitude. Here is the application of GKDA for clinical trial planning problems. The table summarizes 7 instances where the number of the products, trials, time periods, and scenarios are summarized. And we also implemented using PyML and Python and solved using simplex on a standard node of Open University Hoover cluster. The node has 128 gigabytes of memory. It can be noted that the 10 product case cannot be generated by simplex in Open University Hoover cluster, and for the cases which can be solved, the GKDA can obtain the solutions within the 2% gap from the optimal. And for the cases that cannot be solved for the 7 and 10 product case, the GKDA will be able to obtain the solutions within half hour. And for 7 product case, we have over 2 million discrete variables, 8 million continuous variables, and over 33 million constraints. We also apply the GKDA to the process network synthesis with 2 processes under uncertain yield, and optimal EMPV of MSP around 11 million, while the EMPV of the GKDA is only 9 million, and the result the gap from the optimal is 20%. And it is because due to the greedy nature of GKDA, where the GKDA solution never recommends holding inventory because of negative item value. And current item generation rules of GKDA fails to correctly assess the potential benefit of holding inventory for future time. So the differences in inventory levels along with the capacity expansion decisions explain this relative large percent gap. To address the greedy nature of the GKDA, the second approach is the absolute expected value solution approach, which we call AEV. AEV simulates the traditional decision-making process under uncertainty. Unlike the GKDA, which decompose both time and scenario indices, AEV only decompose scenario indices and generates deterministic subproblems. And AEV generates 2 types of deterministic subproblem, where one determines the decisions before uncertainty realizations, and other determine the recourse decisions based on the realized outcomes. And here is the results of artificial lift infrastructure planning with AEV approach. So the AEV is also able to obtain the optimal solutions for this problem, but require relative longer solution times compared to GKDA. And here is the results of clinical trial cases with AEV approach, where AEV obtain much tighter gaps compared to the GKDA, and however require relative longer solution time compared to GKDA. And AEV were able to obtain the near optimum within 1% gap from optimal solutions for the cases solved. Back to the process network synthesis, where the GKDA has a large gap from the optimal as a 20%, the AEV will be able to obtain the near optimal solutions for this case. For conclusion, we have implemented and compiled 11 MSP models under Type 2 endogenous uncertainty in PyML and Python, and we compare different attributes of MSP models under endogenous uncertainty from literature. Both GKDA and AEV yields tight solutions for MSP. The gap of the GKDA solutions from the optimal range from 0 to 20% for proper instances solved, and the gap of the AEV solutions from the optimal range from 0 to 1% for problem instances solved. The future direction lies to apply approaches to the rest of the MSP models under Type 2 endogenous uncertainty in library. And here I also want to thank the Rapid Manufacturing Institute and Open University Cooper Cluster, and thank you. I'm very happy to answer any questions.